Yo, what's going on, guys? So in today's episode of Ableton Basics, we'll be looking at chords, what you need to know to make them, major, minor, inversions, all that stuff to start making your chords, to get them into your production and start making music. Alright, so jumping into Ableton, the first thing you need to know about making chords are there are two basic types of scales. So you have major and minor. So one is a happy kind of scale and one is a sad sounding scale. There's lots of other scales, but these are two basic and most commonly used ones. So we'll use C major scale for this one. So the C major scale is all of the white keys repeating from C up to B and then looping around again to C. And the first trick about scales in kind of major and minor is there's really easy ways. So say if I want it to be in F sharp major, the nice thing about scales is because it's all numerical or mathematical, I can pitch up from C to F sharp and I then have the F sharp major scale. The same thing works for minor scales, so A minor actually uses all the white keys as well. So in the same way that we pitched up to say F sharp major from C major, we can do the same because it is all mathematical. So if I want to go to B sharp minor, there we go, I have B sharp minor scale. So now I have the kind of B sharp minor scale played out over a bar in a quick little motion. And if I want to pitch it to any other key, because again it is all mathematical, this is the most useful tip if you're a beginner. Know that starting from A on the keyboard and picking all the white keys will give you a minor scale, starting from C will give you a major scale. We can then pick and find whatever key we want to work in. So that's a really useful trick if you are a beginner, don't really know too much about scales, don't want to spend the time going online to go and find a scale to then have to try and remember it. Just go from C, go from A, pitch it up to wherever you want to be, and then you'll have your kind of scale, and then you can make your chords off of that. There's another really useful trick before we get into making chords that I'll show you by using the scale to start making chords. So we'll do A minor again. Alright, so if we know we're in A, and we'll duplicate that up one. So now we have a couple of octaves of the A minor scale. If you then hit 0 on the keyboard, this creates ghost notes, so they won't play when we start playing audio. So this means you can then create a kind of grid that you can pitch up and down to any octave you like, and you can start making chords. So using the grid, I made a very quick chord progression to show you just how easy it is to use this kind of ghost notes and the scale trick that I've shown you before. So all I've done there is find a kind of bass line note that I liked, pitched it, kind of doubled that one up an octave, found another bass line note that I like, pitched it up an octave, did the same for all four chords, and then I have a little chord progression in a minor scale that can be pitched up and down however you want it. So jumping into the next bit, now that we know that that's an A minor scale and a major scale, how to make them, how to then find and pick another key that you'd like to work in, is how do we create chords by using that scale? So basically there's a rule to major and minor chords. So if you are working, we're in A minor again, so if I highlight this note, for a major chord you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, and for a minor chord you count up 1, 2, 3. And the great thing about using this kind of scale technique is because you have all the keys in that scale highlighted, when you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, I know that C sharp is not in the A minor scale, but when I count up 1, 2, 3, I then have C, which is in the A minor scale. The next rule to kind of take away from this is if you count it up 3, you'll then count up 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 to get your next chord in that scale, and this will go on and on and on. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously that's not a nice chord, it's a kind of 7th, 9th, all mashed into one. So if we jump up to C, which I think is a major chord, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3 to finish the kind of rule, the weird maths that goes on within scales. So that's how you find major and minor chords. You count up 1, 2, 3 for a minor chord, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 to get the next kind of note in that chord for minor chords, and on major chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Then you have a major chord played in the minor scale. So now we know that we have the scale trick, we have how to make chords within that scale, how to find them easily and start creating our chords. The next thing we need to know is inversions. So inversions are flipping kind of keys within that chord up and down to create different harmonically sounding chords using the same notes. So I'm just going to add a quick bass note so that we remember what our bottom chord was. So I've done that by copying the bottom one, pitching it down 1 octave from where we started. So it's a very simple chord progression. It's 4 chords, 1 bar length each. Very kind of easy to do and a bit cruddy sounding. But if we start to use inversions, so just trying to bring chords into different structures within the same progression. We have a completely different sounding, kind of less cheesy, still kind of cheesy, but less cheesy sounding chord progression just by using inversions. So on a couple I did a first inversion, taking that top note that was there down to this one, again on that one I think it was. So that was a first and second inversion because both the notes above the first note came down, and again a second or a double inversion on the last chord. So why are inversions useful? Inversions are useful because that's how people kind of play piano. It's a more realistic, so rather than somebody having to reach their fingers all the way up here, they'd play the piano so they had their hands closer together, meaning they'd only have to move that finger down 1 note, they keep that finger the same, move that one down 2. It's a much easier and it's a more realistic way of playing the chord progression rather than all over. It's keeping the notes more grouped together to create kind of a nicer, more tighter sound and an easier way, a more humanized way of playing piano. So the last bit to know about kind of chords and scales, if you know all the notes here, you can pitch other chords or other notes within the chord up or down to other notes within the scales to get different sounding chords. So all I've done there is notice that, okay, there's a note up from where we were and there's a note down from where we are. Let's change this middle note, pitch it down to that one, see if it sounds good. And that's a perfectly nice chord. That one's not, I'm not too sure about that, but it works. And this is the nice thing about using this kind of ghosted notes with the scale. You can play around, find different harmonics maybe that you wouldn't have realised is there, but now can use and use effectively without any knowledge of music theory. This is bog standard, what you need to know to get your tracks up and going, very quick, very fast, that have more professional sounding chords. If you're using inversions and these kind of little note changes, it'll go from having chords that maybe didn't sound right together to sounding glued, sounding more professional rather than all over the place and maybe out of key. So for anybody wanting to take this even further, using that kind of second thing I taught you in the video about counting up 3-4 or 4-3, we can do the same. So this was a 4, it's a major chord within the minor scale, so we had to count up 4, then 3 to get our triad. So if I then count up 1, 2, 3, 4, I then get what's known as a 7th chord, and if I did this again, counting up 3, I'd get the 9th, or the 8th. The 8th, I think that is. 8th or 9th, doesn't really matter. If you don't know music theory and you can count up 4 and 3, then this will work for you. So I've added in what's known as a 7th chord. So counting up 3 or 4 from the top note in the triad, we have this chord progression. So all I've done here is not really used any music theory, but just known a couple basic rules about major and minor scales, how to find the scale, how to then find chords by using a little bit of maths, and then having this kind of visual clue to help me spot and find my next chord. And we have a nice chord progression, not one I would use, but let's say we pitched it around a bit. A kind of nice chord progression that you can work and use any way to find a chord or a progression that you like with different timings by changing how long chords are, to pitch it into whatever key you want. If you look at it this way, they're really basic, really simple. Yes, that you can do some very advanced stuff with them once you start to understand the maths and play around long enough. You'll start noticing your own kind of what works, what doesn't. That kind of all becomes clear in your mind, just what harmonics are going to work. It's that thing of knowing how to make a track. It is playing around, but with the fundamentals of being able to find chord scales, how to make them, it can really help and start to get you on your music journey a lot quicker than struggling around with nothing there going, I don't know. That wasn't going to work out nicely, but that's kind of the same chord that we have down here. But it takes that pain away just by going in and let me find my minor scale because I want a slightly more sad song. And you're off. So I've spent literally no time on this progression at all, but because the maths is there, I know what I'm doing to find my next chord. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's a diminished chord, but that's for another video. It works. It's not out of tune, it will somewhat works. Yes, that's a horrible chord progression, but the maths is right. It's right. So I hope you found that kind of little tutorial on chord scales and how to make them slightly useful. Very basic. If you can count to 7, maybe even 12, then you're off to a good start. If you can see the difference between grey and white, you're off to a good start. It really is that simple. Start making chords. This is Ableton Basics. For me, this is basic, but I remember where I was, so hopefully this is useful to someone. Peace.